You know, I've been pulled over more times in my life than I care to count. Some of those stops were legitimate. A taillight out here, a rolling stop there. Others felt like fishing expeditions, moments where I was left sitting behind the wheel with my heart pounding, watching a pair of reflective sunglasses approach my window, completely unsure of what was about to happen. And I know I'm not alone in that feeling. If you drive in America long enough, it's not a matter of if you'll see those flashing lights in your rearview mirror, it's a matter of when. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night, and it's the very reason I sat down to write this article. Most drivers have absolutely no idea what the police are legally allowed to do during a traffic stop in 2026. And more importantly, they don't know the specific words that can protect their rights without escalating the situation. So before we dive into the nitty-gritty, before we talk about the law and the loopholes and the little verbal shields you carry with you, I have to ask you something, and I genuinely want you to think about it. When was the last time you were pulled over? And looking back, do you think you said something in those first 30 seconds that might have accidentally given the officer more permission than they actually had? I want you to really think about that moment, and I'd love for you to share your experience in the comments, because your story might be the one that helps someone else avoid the same mistake. Now, stick with me here, because what we're about to walk through isn't just a dry recitation of the law. It's a look behind the curtain at how police officers are trained to think, how the system is designed to work, and the subtle but powerful ways that the average driver can navigate this encounter without losing their freedom or their cool. We're going to talk about the things that happen in 2026 that might be different from just a few years ago, the new technologies, the new legal precedents, and the old tricks that never seem to go away. And I promise you, by the time we're done, you're going to feel a lot more confident about handling that moment when the world narrows down to the space between your steering wheel and that blue uniform. Let's start with the most fundamental misunderstanding that I see out there, and it's one that even seasoned travelers and road warriors get wrong. People tend to think of a traffic stop as a casual conversation between two citizens. They think, well, I'll just be polite, answer the questions, and be on my way. But that's not what a traffic stop is, legally speaking. A traffic stop is a seizure under the Fourth Amendment. From the moment those lights come on and you feel that involuntary pull to the side of the road, you are legally detained. And here's where it gets sticky. Because you are detained, the officer has a certain amount of leeway to investigate the reason for the stop. But that leeway is not unlimited, and it's definitely not a blank check to rummage through your life. The courts have spent decades trying to draw a line in the sand, and that line keeps shifting, sometimes subtly, sometimes in big ways. One of the biggest shifts we're seeing in 2026 has to do with the use of data and predictive algorithms. Police departments across the country are now using software that flags vehicles based on license plate readers, connecting your plate to everything from unpaid tickets to a pattern of driving at certain times of night in certain areas. So when that officer walks up to your window, they might already have a readout on their in-car terminal that tells them more about you than you'd expect. They might know if the registered owner has a prior arrest, if the vehicle is linked to any investigative alerts, or if there's a reason to be suspicious before you've even rolled down the glass. That's the new reality. But here's the part they don't tell you. That information, while it might make the officer wary, does not change your fundamental rights. You are still the person in the car, and they still need a reason to extend the stop beyond its original purpose. So what are they legally allowed to do the moment they step up to your window? They can ask for your license, registration, and proof of insurance. That's the core of it. That's the mission. But human nature being what it is, and police training being what it is, they're almost always going to ask a few extra questions. Where are you headed? Have you been drinking tonight? Do you know why I pulled you over? And this is where that little voice in the back of your head should start whispering. Because those questions, innocent as they sound, are the gateway to a much broader investigation. If you answer them freely, you are giving consent, and consent is the magic key that unlocks doors the law might otherwise keep closed. Let me give you a real scenario that plays out on American highways every single night. An officer pulls someone over for a burnout tag light. It's minor. It's the kind of thing you might not even know about. The officer approaches and says, "You know, I stopped you because your license plate light is out. No big deal. By the way, do you have any weapons or drugs in the car?" Now think about that question for a second. It's completely unrelated to a burnout light. But if you answer, "No, you don't have any drugs," the officer might then say, "Well, You wouldn't mind if I took a quick look around, would you? And here's the trap. Most people, wanting to be helpful, wanting to show they have nothing to hide, say, "Sure, go ahead." And just like that, you've given consent to a search. The officer didn't need probable cause. They didn't need a warrant. They just needed you to say yes. And in 2026, that hasn't changed. Consent is still the most powerful tool in an officer's kit because it bypasses all the constitutional hurdles. But here's where the words that protect you come into play. You have the right to say no, and you have the right to say it politely, firmly, and without sounding like you're trying to hide something. The magic phrase, the one that I teach everyone I know, is this: "Officer, I do not consent to any searches. I am not refusing to cooperate, but I do not consent." That's it. Those words create a record. They put a flag in the ground. If the officer searches anyway, and they might, because let's be honest, some officers will search regardless of what you say, that phrase becomes your lifeline in court. It tells the judge that you did not waive your rights, and anything found as a result of that search could be thrown out. Now, I can already hear some of you thinking, well, if I say that, won't it make the officer angry? Won't it make things worse? And that's a fair concern. It's a concern born from experience, from watching videos online, from hearing stories about stops that went sideways. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that asserting your rights comes with zero risk. That would be dishonest. But what I will tell you is that the alternative, the act of passively giving up your rights to avoid a tense moment, can lead to consequences that follow you for years. A drug charge, a weapons charge, even something as simple as an outstanding warrant from a different jurisdiction. The calculus is yours to make, but knowledge is the thing that tips the scale. Let's talk about time, because time is another factor that people don't fully grasp. A traffic stop cannot last forever. The officer is allowed to detain you for the amount of time it takes to reasonably complete the mission of issuing a ticket or a warning. Once that mission is complete, you are supposed to be free to go. But here's where it gets gray. If during the stop the officer develops what's called reasonable suspicion of another crime, they can extend the stop to investigate that new suspicion. Maybe they smell marijuana. Maybe they see an open container. Maybe you're acting incredibly nervous, fumbling with your wallet, avoiding eye contact in a way that seems suspicious. Those things can give the officer a legal basis to hold you longer. But if they're just fishing, if they're waiting for a drug dog to show up without any reason to suspect you beyond a hunch, that's where the law is on your side. There was a Supreme Court case a few years back, Rodriguez versus United States, that really hammered this home. It involved a man pulled over for swerving, issued a warning, and then held for a drug dog sniff after the warning was given. The court said that was illegal. Once the mission of the stop was over, the officer couldn't extend it just to wait for the dog. That case is still good law in 2026, and it's a powerful tool. So if you've been given your license back, if you've been told you're getting a warning, and the officer is still hanging around asking questions or waiting for backup, you have the right to ask, "Am I free to go?" That question, "Am I free to go?" is another one of those verbal shields. If the officer says yes, you can leave. If they say no, then they have to articulate why they're detaining you further. And if they can't, anything that happens after that point is on shaky legal ground. Now, I want to shift gears a little and talk about the human element. Because I've been studying this for years, and I've spoken to dozens of officers, some of whom became friends, some of whom I've debated into the ground. And one thing they all agree on is that attitude matters. Not in the sense that a bad attitude justifies a violation of your rights, but in the sense that a confrontational, aggressive demeanor can escalate a situation in ways that are dangerous for everyone. You can assert your rights without being a jerk. You can be firm without being combative. And that balance, that tightrope walk, is the mark of someone who really understands how the system works. I remember talking to a state trooper once, a guy who'd been on the road for 20 years. He told me that he respected drivers who knew their rights. He said, "When someone tells me they don't consent to a search, I know they've done their homework. I might not like it, but I know where the line is." It's the people who are screaming, who are recording everything while yelling about the Constitution. Those are the ones who make him nervous. Not because they're wrong, but because the dynamic becomes unpredictable. So my advice, and this is coming from years of watching this play out, is to be polite, be respectful, but be clear. Use those magic words. Keep your hands on the wheel where they can be seen. Inform the officer of any movements you're going to make before you make them. And remember that the goal is to get home safely, not to win an argument on the shoulder of the highway. Let's talk about recording, because this is 2026, and everyone has a camera in their pocket. The law in most states is clear. You have the right to record police officers performing their duties in public, as long as you're not interfering with their work. And a traffic stop, since it happens on a public roadway, is generally considered a public space. So if you want to hit record on your phone, you can. But here's the nuance, and this is something I've seen people get tripped up on. If you shove the phone in the officer's face, if you make it impossible for them to do their job, if you're recording while also arguing, you cross the line into obstruction. So if you're going to record, do it quietly. Set the phone on the dashboard or hold it in a way that's obvious but not aggressive. Let the audio capture what's being said. That footage, that audio, is your witness. It's the thing that can prove later whether the stop was legal, whether consent was given, whether things went sideways. And in a he said, she said world, that video is gold. There's another layer to this that involves the passengers in the car. If you're a passenger, you have rights too. You're not just an accessory to the driver's stop. You are also detained, because you can't just open the door and walk away when the car is pulled over. But you are not required to identify yourself in most states, unless the officer has a reason to suspect you've committed a crime. And you are not required to answer questions about where you're coming from or what you're doing. Passengers have the same right to remain silent that the driver has. But here's the twist. If the officer asks you to step out of the car, you have to comply. That's settled law. The Supreme Court said in Pennsylvania versus Mims that an officer can order the driver out of the vehicle for safety reasons, and that was later extended to passengers. So you can be asked to exit, and you should do so calmly. But once you're out, you're still not required to answer questions, and you're still not required to consent to a search of your person unless the officer has probable cause to believe you're armed. I want to take a moment to talk about the invisible things, the things you can't see, but that are very much present during a stop. I'm talking about the officer's training, their mindset, their stress levels. A traffic stop is one of the most dangerous things an officer does. They approach a vehicle not knowing who's inside, not knowing what's waiting for them. That fear, that hypervigilance, informs every interaction. And while it's not an excuse for overreach, understanding it can help you navigate the stop more effectively. When you make sudden movements, when you reach into the glove box without warning, when you lean down out of sight, you're triggering that officer's survival instinct. So even if you're just reaching for your registration, tell them. Say, my registration is in the glove box. I'm going to reach for it now. That simple act of communication can defuse a lot of tension. Now, let's get into the weeds of 2026 specifically. There are a few new developments that are worth paying attention to. One of them is the expansion of automated license plate readers and the data sharing between states. It used to be that if you had a warrant in one state, you could cross the line and feel relatively safe, at least from that warrant. Not anymore. Those readers are networked. They ping databases in real time. So if there's a flag on your plate for any reason, the officer knows before they even turn on their lights. That's not necessarily a violation of your rights, but it does mean that the pretext for the stop might be something minor, while the real reason is that the system flagged you. And that's where you have to be careful. If the stop is based on that flag, and the flag is erroneous, or if the officer uses that flag to justify a search that goes beyond the scope of the stop, you have grounds to challenge it. Another development is the increased use of body cameras and dash cameras. Most departments now require them, and that's a good thing for transparency. But here's the catch. Those cameras are rolling, but they're not always recording everything. Officers can sometimes turn them off, or they might start them late. So if you're recording on your own phone, you have a backup. And if the officer's footage mysteriously goes missing or doesn't capture the key moment, your recording becomes the evidence. That's a powerful check on power. We also have to talk about the rise of so-called roadside tests that aren't what they seem. You've heard of field sobriety tests, the walk and turn, the one-leg stand, the horizontal gaze nystagmus where they follow your eye with a pen. Those are voluntary. You are not legally required to perform them. In fact, in many states, you can refuse them. The refusal might lead to a license suspension if you're later convicted of DUI. But here's the thing. Those tests are designed to give the officer probable cause for an arrest. They're subjective. The officer decides whether you passed or failed. So if you've had a couple of drinks, if you're tired, if you have a bad back or inner ear issues, Those tests can make you look impaired even when you're not. And the words that protect you in that moment are simple. I respectfully decline to perform any field sobriety tests. I would like to speak with an attorney. That's it. You're not being uncooperative. You're exercising your right to not provide evidence against yourself. And then there's the breathalyzer, the chemical test. This gets complicated because of implied consent loss. In every state, if you drive, you've implicitly agreed to submit to a chemical test if you're arrested for DUI. Refusing can result in automatic license suspension, often for a year or more. But here's the nuance. The breathalyzer at the roadside, the portable one they bring to your window, is usually voluntary. The one at the station, after arrest, is the one that triggers implied consent. So if an officer asks you to blow into a portable device before you're arrested, you can say no. They might not like it, but you can. And if you're arrested and taken to the station, you have to decide, blow or refuse, and face the administrative penalties. That's a personal decision that depends on your situation, your tolerance, your likelihood of being over the limit. But knowing the difference between the roadside screen and the evidentiary test is crucial. Let's talk about something that doesn't get enough attention: the way race and socioeconomic status play into traffic stops. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that not everyone experiences a traffic stop the same way. Studies have shown for decades that Black and Hispanic drivers are more likely to be pulled over, more likely to be searched, and more likely to be subjected to force than white drivers. That's a reality. And the advice I'm giving here, the words that protect you, they're not a magic shield against bias. They're a tool, but they work within a system that has deep flaws. So if you're a person of color, you might have to navigate these encounters with an extra layer of caution. You might have to weigh the risk of asserting your rights against the risk of escalating a situation with an officer who already views you with suspicion. And that's a heavy burden. It's not fair, but it's real. And the best I can do is to give you the information, the phrases, the understanding of the law, so that you can make the best decision for your safety in the moment. I remember reading a case study a few years ago about a man in South Carolina who was pulled over for a seatbelt violation. The officer asked if he could search the car. The man said no. The officer called for AK 9 unit anyway. The dog arrived 45 minutes later, alerted on the car, and they found a small amount of marijuana. The man fought it in court, arguing that the wait for the dog was an unreasonable extension of the stop. The court agreed, and the evidence was suppressed. That case made its way through the system and became a precedent that other drivers have used since. But think about what that man went through. 45 minutes sitting there, knowing he did nothing wrong, knowing he said no, but still being detained. It took a lawyer, a court case, and months of his life to make it right. That's the reality of asserting your rights. It doesn't always work in the moment, but it works in the long run, and it works for the next person. So what are the words? Let's distill this down to a few phrases that you should memorize, practice, and have ready in your back pocket. Number 1, I do not consent to any searches. That's your baseline. Number 2, am I free to go? That's your exit strategy. Number 3, I am going to remain silent, and I would like to speak with an attorney. That's your shield if things escalate. And number 4, I am recording this interaction for my safety and yours. That's your transparency tool. You don't have to say them all at once. You don't have to be aggressive. You just have to know when to deploy them. I also want to talk about what happens after the stop. Most people, once they drive away, just want to forget it ever happened. They're relieved. They're shaking. They just want to get home. But if you feel your rights were violated, if you were searched without consent, if the stop was clearly pretextual and extended beyond reason, you have options. You can file a complaint with the department. You can contact a civil rights attorney. You can request the dash and body camera footage before it gets deleted. Most departments have retention policies, and if you wait too long, the footage might be gone. So act quickly. Write down everything you remember as soon as you can. The officer's name, badge number, patrol car number, the time, the location, the weather, what was said. Those details fade fast, and they're crucial if you decide to pursue it. Now, I know this has been a long walk through a heavy topic, but I want to leave you with something that I think about every time I get behind the wheel. A traffic stop is a moment of vulnerability, but it's also a moment of choice. You can choose to be passive, to let the situation wash over you, to hope for the best. Or you can choose to be informed, to be prepared, to know the words that draw the line between cooperation and self-incrimination. It's not about being confrontational. It's about being aware. It's about understanding that the law, for all its flaws, does provide a framework. And within that framework, you have power. You have the power to say no. You have the power to remain silent. You have the power to record. And you have the power to walk away, not as a victim, but as someone who knew the rules and played them smartly. The next time you see those lights in your mirror, take a breath. Remember that the person walking toward you is doing a job, and you are a citizen with rights. The encounter doesn't have to be adversarial. It can be a simple exchange of information, a moment of inconvenience, and then you're on your way. But if it starts to drift, if the questions turn from your license to your travel plans, if the request to search comes out, you'll be ready. You'll have the words. And those words, spoken calmly and clearly, are the difference between consent and coercion. They're the difference between a memory and a mistake. So I'll ask you again, because I really do want to know, when was the last time you were pulled over? And looking back, do you think you said something in those first 30 seconds that might have accidentally given the officer more permission than they actually had? Think about it. Share it in the comments. Your story might be the one that helps someone else avoid the same trap. And if you've never been pulled over, or if you've always wondered what you should say, now you know. You've got the playbook. You've got the words. And you've got the understanding that in the dance between authority and liberty, the smallest steps matter most. Drive safe out there.